So we plan to spend the next hour and a half with all of you. Our goal is for the workshop to end at 11:30. Brian's going to start us out by discussing the current status of state funding, our advocacy efforts, and the advocacy campaign timeline. Then I'm going to go over our brand new super fun advocacy video campaign. Katura and I are going to discuss meeting with our legislators, sharing our stories, and components of good storytelling. Then we're going to break out into small groups to work on our storytelling together. We'll come back together as a larger group and wrap up with closing remarks and a commitment from all of you. So to get us started, I'm going to pass it over to Brian to talk about the current status of state funding.
Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming you can hear me well because everybody's waving at me. All right. Actually, before we begin, Katura, would you mind backing up a slide so we can see the images of, yeah, awesome. So when this first popped up on the screen, and I know I've had an opportunity to look at it a little bit before we met today, just looking at those images, I always get a little bit of emotion running through me. So the first two images are last year's Advocacy Day in Albany, so 2019 or 2020. We did do stuff in 2020 early on. And then 2019, I believe, is the third image over where we're wearing blue shirts. And so as somebody that's been doing Advocacy Day for a long time and advocacy in general for libraries, it's a little bit nostalgic to see so many people together in one place and not having to visit online, but it's also just a reminder of how great our system is at doing advocacy and working with elected officials at the local level, state level, and even at the federal level as in most recent years, just to tell the story of libraries and the good work that we do, both in good times as well as bad times. Katura, could you fast forward to my slide now? Excellent. So as Erica indicated, I'm going to talk a little bit about how funding works from a state level perspective and how that money trickles down to Southern Tier Library System to provide support services to all of you, but also how it trickles down to all of you at the local library level where the most important work gets done. Before I begin, I just want to say that library funding, the state of library funding, both at the local level for rural libraries as well as at the state level, has always been the thing that's piqued my interest to continue to fight and advocate for libraries, because it is something that where libraries are not strongly funded. And it was something that was very apparent to me early on when I started doing this work. And just to give you a general understanding, the level of state funding to libraries right now, based on the governor's proposal of yesterday, and we're going to get into that in just a moment, is the equivalent to how libraries were funded in 2000. So go back 2 decades at the beginning of this new century that we're in, the 21st century, funding levels for libraries in general are 20 years removed and at the same level that they were 20 years ago. And you can go back about 4 years before 2000, so around 1996, 1994, when the internet was actually inserted into our service model. So before 1994, most libraries didn't have public internet connections. If they did, they were dial-up and people were trying to figure out what they were. Public computers really weren't a thing. There might be a standalone OPAC that allowed you to surf a stagnant catalog, not a web catalog, but there was no internet in our model. And all of you work in libraries today, and you know how much our world revolves around an internet connection between your servers, your Wi-Fi connections, your staff computers, your public computers, and just the way that we interact with the 21st world in general. Funding levels today are only 13% higher than they were in 1994 here in New York State. You would think, given the fact that about, I would say, almost 40% of our operations relies on information technology support, you would think there would have been some radical adjustment between then and now that would support us in their work. But the truth is there hasn't been that radical adjustment. And so that's why we need to continue to advocate until we can make that significant change to not only support all the good librarianship work that we do, but also to bring it to a place where we're providing 21st century technologies. So with that being said, I just want to focus on the current state of funding for STLS, not just the library system, but all of you as member libraries. In 2019, local library services aid was at $113,000. So all of you received a check about a month ago. It represented a 20% cut over 2019 levels. That was the aid that all of you received from the state to provide just general support services to your community members. And all of you know it's not a big percentage of your budget. It probably represents, on average, about 1% of most member libraries' budgets, give or take a few percentage points based on the size of your budget and what else it entails. Construction aid was at $886,000. So the state allocated $886,000 to the Southern Tier Library System for member libraries to apply for construction funds to do capital projects like accessibility projects to make certain all people can enter our buildings without reservation, making certain that we update energy efficiencies so that not only are we being good stewards of the environment, but we're also making certain that we're saving money as well so that we can provide even more outreach services to our community. And then Central Library Development Aid. This is direct funding that goes to Chemung County Library District, which is our central library. And this money is used to pay for things like our overdrive collection. So making certain that the 280,000 residents in the Southern Tier Library System across the 5 counties have access to ebooks, audiobooks, and now downloadable magazine subscriptions as well. And then lastly, Library System Aid. So this is direct support to Southern Tier Library System to provide services to all of you. It was at about just a little shy of $1.2 million in 2019. Well, then the pandemic hit. And so at the end of the budget session in 2020, March 31st, just shortly afterwards, the legislature approved the budget for 2020. And it wasn't great. We got a cut. It was about 2.6%. But then the pandemic hit, literally at the same exact time. So what ended up happening was New York State withheld not only 2.6% of the funding that we got in 2019, but they also withheld another 20%. We will never see that additional 20%. It's not like something that they're going to release at a later date and time when things get better. So in total, it was a 22.6% cut to all the different library aid categories that I have up here on the screen. But in total, the amount of money that comes from New York State to our library system to fund the things that I just talked about, it was a 36% decrease. And as you can see, the biggest loss, so if you look at 2020 figures, the biggest loss for us was construction aid. We went from a pot of money of $886,000 to a pot of money of $365,000. That's a $500,000 loss. It's tough to stomach, and it's quite unfortunate because it really puts us about 14 years behind on construction projects that we really need to take care of right now. So that's where we are in 2020. Fortunately, Katura, if you could just move forward onto the next slide. I don't know how to make sense of this news. I actually was sending messages to Katura and Erica yesterday when we found out the governor's proposal for 2021. And usually politically the way the budget works is the governor proposes reductions for the areas where he can save money, and he infuses money into areas where, and please don't misinterpret this as a political statement, but he infuses money in areas where that better align with his agenda. And so we play this game, or we have this dance over the next 3 months where we advocate to the Senate as well as Assembly representatives to restore whatever cut the governor gave us. Well, no surprise, the governor did cut libraries this year, but we also have to be sympathetic to that cut because it has been a tough year for so many reasons and across so many levels. But yesterday, the governor came out with his budget proposal, and it was a 5% cut compared to what the legislature approved last year, not taking into account the 20% withholding. But the best way for us to interpret it is it's a 7.6% decrease compared to 2019 funding levels. So while this may not seem like a great thing, but I'll highlight the numbers that you see here: $105,000 for local library services aid, $365,000 for construction aid, $154,000 for central library development aid, and library system aid is a little bit more, a little shy of $1.1 million. Again, I didn't know how to interpret this. Was this a win or not? Because quite honestly, when we put our 20% 21 budget together for the library system, and we anticipated what aid might look like in these categories that you see on the screen, we anticipated flat funding levels, or in other words, the 20% cut that we received in 2020. I know a lot of this is me just sharing numbers with you, and a lot of these numbers are the things that I work on every single day. But I think it's always important that we have a bigger understanding of how the funds flow from Albany into our local region to do the work that we do, because this is a big bulk of the funding. And so I think it's always important that we take a little bit of time each year just to truly understand what the numbers look like and where they come from and how they're proposed. And the last thing I do want to say about this slide before I move into the timeline and we move forward in the workshop is we have this thing in the system called cost share. And if you're a director that's on this call or you're a board president, you get that invoice from Southern Tier Library System every year. And system-wide, it's a total bill of about $350,000. And it goes up anywhere from 3 to 4% every year, because that's just the cost of that increase is about 3 to 4% every year. It has experienced the lowest increases in most recent years, just because we've been really good at managing money and making certain that we don't use cost share as a mechanism to offset the library's system's budget. But what that cost share pays for is everything that's technology related. So our ILS workflows, StarCat, Blue Cloud Analytics, and as well as our digital library collections. And go back to the first thing that I said when I started talking about funding. New York State has never compensated libraries for the change that took place in the 21st century. The amount of money that we receive now is equal to that of what we received back in 2000. If the state would just up the amount of support to meet us at the level that we need funding to do technology related things like an integrated library system, workflows, StarCat, Blue Cloud Analytics, Overdrive, cost share goes away. And I try to be a little bit automated about that. Cost share goes away because that's really important. Southern Tier Library System does not like sending out cost share bills every year. But if we did not have cost share, you can take away all of our other professional support services, strategic planning, trustee development, construction aid support, beyond what the state requires for us to do, support on local funding referendums, local IT support that's not related to the ILS. You can take all that away, and we can do away with cost share. But the only thing that your public library system, STLS, would ever provide you is just support for an integrated library system. And that's it, because that's all we could afford to do. So I guess the point I want to make is I just really wish, and this is why it's important we advocate every year, not only so that you guys get the funding you need for construction projects and operating support, but also so at some point in time, cost share could just go away and the system doesn't have to send out that bill every year. All right, so moving forward, let's talk a little bit about timeline. Advocacy is not like a quarterly thing. I know sometimes member libraries get involved in advocacy like right around this time of year. It's why you registered for this workshop. It's why you're on this call. We're starting to think about advocacy because the budget came out yesterday from the governor. Clearly we got a cut. So now we have to do some work to ask the legislature to either reduce that cut or at least get us back to flat level funding compared to 2019, or an increase. That would be great. But it happens all year round. And so I kind of want to talk about that timeline in terms of what STLS does on the back end, but also what we encourage member libraries do to participate on the public facing side or the front end. So in September, this past September 2020, myself as well as other STLS consultants, we met with the New York Library Association, which is our professional association in Albany that coordinates all this advocacy effort for state aid on our behalf. We met with the state librarian and the Board of Regents. One of my roles as a system director is I serve on the Board of Regents Advisory Council for Libraries, and we talk with the Board of Regents about funding priorities as well as legislative priorities that will help libraries better improve. And so those are the discussions that take place in September. And then we start plotting in terms of like what we need to ask for, both from a funding standpoint as well as changes in legislation. Then we move forward to October. Erica, Couture, and I are on the call. We're primarily the people at STLS that facilitate advocacy efforts on behalf of the membership. We also have other amazing professional staff that help us out from time to time, which is super helpful because we couldn't do that work without them. But in October, we start taking the priorities that were discussed at the state level in Albany with the state library and NILA and the Board of Regents. And we start talking about, okay, so how do we work with our membership and start getting them focused and excited about talking about these priorities with state elected officials. And we do that all throughout fall, November and December. And then we move into today, which is January. The governor issued the executive budget yesterday, super perfect timing. Erica and Couture and I actually planned for this workshop to happen today, just so I could put that talking point in there. And then STLS issues a public statement, I don't want to say slamming the governor, but expressing public disappointment in the governor's proposal. We're not exactly sure if we're going to do that this year. We have some strategizing to do on the back end because quite honestly, we're in a lot better position than we anticipated that we would be in, given the circumstances of the recession as well as the pandemic. And then we move to February and March, and that's where all of you come into play. This is our opportunity to tell our story. We push it out through social media, we push it out through email, through phone calls, as well as getting letters to the editor and the newspaper. And we work with all of you to talk about the amazing work that you do 12 months of the year. And you know, Eric and Couture are going to talk about this in just a minute, but just talking about how, regardless of the circumstances and the adversity that we faced during the pandemic, which we are still in, how we continued to provide services to our community, even though our physical spaces were no longer open for a temporary period of time. And your stories really make a difference. We meet with our legislators every year. Every time that we meet with them, they tell us, please just keep coming back. If you're not meeting with us, somebody else is, and we support you, but we've got to hear from you. And, you know, what I've learned over the years, I've been doing advocacy now since, oh gosh, it's been since like 2003. Every year I've been doing advocacy since 2003. So almost, I'm nearing like 2 decades. But, you know, the thing that I've learned through this is the fact that we are getting through to them, because the things that they tell us when we go meet with them from one year to the next are things that we talked about in the previous year. So it's starting to set in, they're starting to understand it. And it's also translating, because we have seen some improvements on library funding, especially around construction aid, which is tremendous support to all of you as local libraries. The budget normally gets determined on March 31st. That's after we play this, go through this dance process. And then the rest of the year, it really is all of what you do. You know, it's inviting legislators to your summer learning programs. It's inviting them to your ribbon cutting ceremonies when you open up that new community room or something that was tied to a construction project. It's just inviting them for any reason you can think of to just show them how amazing you are and what you do. And also just writing them a lot of thank you letters anytime that they do something for us that makes a difference for the following year. So that's kind of like a 15-minute recap of how state funding works for all of you as libraries and us as a system. How much further we really need to go as a library community, but also the front end as well as the back end timeline, just to know that this is something that's happening all year round. And so we now are at that point in this timeline where we're engaging with all of you. And I think that's something both Eric and Couture look forward to talking about for the rest of the workshop. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brian. So as Brian mentioned, advocacy at STLS is more than just Library Advocacy Day and riding the bus to Albany. And this year, Couture, Brian, and I have been talking about advocacy for months, which we do anyway, but we've been excited about it this year in particular. And in our discussions, we came up with this idea to develop a video campaign. Every STLS member library has stepped up during the COVID-19 pandemic to offer new and unique services. Library staff have been working hard to meet the needs of their community and their patrons, even when you couldn't be in the building. And we wanted to highlight this important work and all of the ways that libraries have adapted their services during the pandemic to show our legislators why our libraries are so important to our communities. It's incredible and inspiring to see all of the cool projects you've all engaged in on social media and to hear about them on our system-wide calls. Some of you have even shared feedback that you've received from your patrons about how meaningful libraries have been during this difficult year. And it's clear that libraries are important to our communities and libraries are adapting to meet their community needs. So to highlight this important work and all of the ways that libraries have adapted their services during the pandemic, we created these videos to show our legislators why libraries are so important, and we selected 5 programs and services to highlight the examples of this that seem to represent adapted services being offered across the system. Tora, could you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So we created a trailer for our advocacy video campaign, and we posted it to our social media accounts yesterday. I saw that some of you have already liked and engaged with it, so thank you for that. The videos in this series are going to be released on a weekly basis starting this coming Monday, January 25th, and then every Monday leading up to Advocacy Day, which will happen on Friday, February 26th. So we're going to take just a minute. Katura is going to play the trailer for us now so we can see what to expect in the next 5 weeks.
We love our libraries. They provide equitable access to information and resources for people of every age, income level, location, race, ethnicity, and physical ability. Staff and volunteers at the 48 library outlets in the Southern Tier Library System work hard to provide services to our communities. But these services come with a cost, and it has been 4 years since libraries have received additional financial support from New York State. This year, the 22.6% withholding in aid will cause long-term damage to the mission of libraries. The pandemic is not over. Our libraries and library system need your support. 2020 demonstrated how important libraries are to residents of the Finger Lakes, Southern Tier, and Western New York. During the pandemic, libraries stepped up, and now they need your help. Send a digital postcard to your legislators today and tell them how much your library means to you. You can learn more about how libraries in the Southern Tier adapted to meet community needs during the COVID-19 pandemic by watching our videos. A new video will be released each week from January 25th to February 22nd.
Thank you, Katura. So now that you've all had a taste of what to expect from the 5 full-length videos, I'm going to take a few moments to tell you about each of them, but we're not going to watch them all now. We'll leave that for you to look forward to as they roll out over the next 5 weeks. So the first video in the series, you can see a screenshot of it on the screen there, is Facilitating Virtual Learning. In that video, we learn more about Miss Sue at the Southeast Steuben County Library and the ways that she has been facilitating virtual learning through online story times and other activities throughout the pandemic. In doing so, Ms. Sue and other staff at the Southeast Steuben County Library have supported local teachers and families, and they've helped make learning from home fun. Next slide. Thanks, Katura. In the second video, we follow Jessie Zay, the director at the Cohocton Public Library, as she leads a Creekside Storytime early in the pandemic. She and other libraries like the Cohocton Public Library adapted their programs for a virtual audience and hosted them online. And Jessie developed programs like this fish-themed Creekside Storytime on the day that the DEC stocked the Cohocton River with fish, along with virtual meetings for her Homesteaders Club, including a virtual dinner for her Homesteaders Club, and other things like online crafts and story times. In the third video, which is titled Using 3D Tech to Craft PPE, we visit the Chemung County Library District Makerspace. CCLD Makerspace staff worked with other library staff and with community volunteers to produce face shields and other personal protective equipment, which were later donated to area hospital staff and other frontline workers, as well as to families and those in need throughout the region. Next, we travel to the Angelica Free Library in Allegheny County to learn more about Wi-Fi hotspot lending. We know that access to a reliable broadband internet connection is critical for students learning at home and for individuals working remotely and for equitable access to the wealth of information available on the internet. At the core of their missions, libraries provide access to information, and many STLS libraries are stepping up to bridge the digital divide by offering loanable hotspots. And in our final video, we travel north to Yates County and the Penn Yan Public Library to learn about the ways that libraries are promoting health and healthy living in their communities. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Sarah Creveling, the youth services librarian at the Penn Yan Public Library, offered several story walks on the Keuka Outlet Trail where community members could walk and read a story that was posted on signs along the trail. That project promoted both health and literacy for kids and families as they walked and ran and biked along the trail. So each of these videos highlights a library story, and it's possible that you have a very similar story to tell about the way that your library has adapted services during the pandemic. We've seen your posts on social media, and we know that you're all doing great work. In just a few moments, Katura is going to talk about how to develop an advocacy story, but before I turn it over to her, I just want to share a bit of information about Library Advocacy Day 2021. So as you might imagine, Library Advocacy Day is going to be a bit different this year. Sadly, we won't be riding the bus to Albany together. There won't be any getting up before the sun to make your way to STLS, no bus snacks and no clipboards. I mean, maybe you have one at home, but it's still going to be great. We're going to go virtual instead, so you can get cozy in front of your computer and wear your favorite advocacy t-shirt, make a cup of tea, and get ready to advocate for libraries by sharing your story. So STLS will take care of all of the online meeting setup. There's nothing that you need to worry about. You don't need to set up individual meetings with your legislators. We'll handle all of that. All you need to do is. Okay, so STLS will set up the meetings with legislators, but we anticipate that attendance could be limited depending on whether we host the meetings or if the legislators host the meetings. And we don't have the full details on that yet. Things are still being worked out.
I will move it on. Hopefully you all heard that. Erica talked about the other activities you can do using our approved hashtags, calling and emailing legislators, and then using the digital postcard, which we'll show you in the next slide. And then we've also provided you the handles for our legislators across the area, so you can tag them in your social media. They usually do like to see that and they interact, which is always a positive thing. So we encourage you to let them know you're advocating. Go ahead.
Thanks so much I hope I don't leave again. I'm so sorry. In addition to the video campaign, we do have these digital postcards. So you all might remember that in the past, we've sent out I Love My Library postcards, and we send you a big stack and ask that you get your patrons to fill them out and tell their legislators why they love their library. And then we would mail these giant stacks of postcards to the legislators to literally physically demonstrate how important libraries are to communities. So this year, we don't really want to encourage people touching a lot of paper and pens, plus many libraries are not fully open. So we're going to try this virtual postcard campaign instead. So we do ask that you encourage your patrons to fill out a digital postcard. You can share announcements about them from STLS social media accounts to your pages. You can create your own posts about them. We have the link to the postcard campaign on the STLS website homepage and on the advocacy page where all the videos are posted. It would be great if you posted a link to the postcard form on your library websites. And you can also announce the postcard campaign at your virtual programs, provide the link, and then encourage your attendees to fill them out. We are going to share these with our legislators. Staff at STLS will work together to print out a copy of each postcard that gets submitted. And then we are going to still mail all of those printed copies to our legislators in March. So we ask that you do help with that. And if you need help telling your story on those postcards or in a call or email to your legislators, or you want to coach a patron through that process, Katura has some tips to share with you now.
Okay, thanks, Erica. So some of you who have attended an advocacy workshop before may have heard me talk about good library storytelling, and you may have heard my story before. This is the sample I usually use. Caden was 5 years old. He stuttered. The library in his town offered a Read to Dogs program. Caden participated, learned to read and pronounce words better, and he doesn't stutter anymore. So hundreds of libraries offer animal reading therapy programs. Libraries transform lives. So what did that story have? It had a real person who was Caden, who was 5 years old. What was his problem? He stuttered. What was the library intervention? They have a Read to Dogs animal therapy program. What's a fact? Hundreds of libraries offer animal read therapy programs. In a phrase that pays, it's just a fun way to say, like we use a hashtag, libraries transform lives, or libraries adapt. Libraries are for everyone. You can see Erica has put a couple of those hashtags on the slide so you could see them. So that's just a basic kind of thing you might want to think about. One simple thought is, what do you want your audience to know think, do, or feel after hearing your story. So ideally, when we're talking to a legislator, we want them to go advocate and bring us more money for our libraries, right? That's the action. We also want them to get a warm feeling maybe in their heart for the good things that libraries do, maybe have a nostalgic feeling for their youth or taking their children or grandchildren to the library. And you want them to feel and to believe that libraries are an important part of the community. So that's sort of when you're designing your story, think about those aspects. Eric and I collect stories and photos from around our member libraries continuously throughout the year. You just saw that we did the video project this year. We've been able to build a good collection of photos, videos, postcards, as you saw those images of programs and stories that our libraries have been able to do for their communities. So we encourage you to try to collect these stories as well. We know you're busy and it's not the easiest thing to do to add another task to your list, but maybe consider implementing a formal story gathering procedure and ask all your staff to use it, where you just describe who the story was about, what the problem was, how the library helped out. And that way, when it's time for Advocacy Day in February, you'll have a great basic basis to form your story. So I've been using this Components of Good Library Storytelling format for a while. Just a couple weeks ago, I learned a new approach. It's called the Story Spine approach. This is a little more helpful for people who maybe like to tell fiction stories or are used to creative writing. So they they provide you with key phrases to start, a structure and a function. So for example, I wrote a story spine approach story about Joey. So every day, Joey went to the public library after school to work on his homework assignments until his mom ended her work shift at 5 p.m. and picked him up. But then the COVID-19 pandemic altered the lives of Joey and his mom. Joey's school moved to virtual learning, and Joey was left home all day while his mom went to work as an essential grocery store worker. The public library had to close to the public temporarily because of COVID-19 safety precautions. Joey's mom could not afford to pay for internet service at her house. Joey was only able to do schoolwork when his mom drove him to his grandparents' house on the weekend. Because of this disruption to his learning, his grades began to slip and he lost interest in his courses. But one day, a local librarian saw Joey's mom in the grocery store and mentioned the new hotspot lending program the library was offering, which could help students like Joey. Joey and his mom checked out a Wi-Fi hotspot from the library for no charge, and Joey has been able to keep up with his coursework and raise his grades back to normal. So that's an example of a story, a very real story that some of you might have experienced during the pandemic. And using the story spine approach is just a way to kind of help you formulate that. So a checklist, I already did mention, what do you want your audience to think, know, feel, or do after your story? So just keep in mind why we're telling these stories and what we hope people will do. Try to have the beginning, middle, and end. Well, sometimes they might not necessarily be in that order, but include conflict, the tension or the spark, which will lead to the climax, and then a resolution, and a change or transformation, which we want the library to be at the heart of that change or transformation. And then just a few speaking tips to help present yourself better. I know we've been doing this for nearly a year now, but a lot of these meetings, here are just some tips that we wanted to share with you. So mute your microphone as soon as you enter the virtual meeting room. For meetings with legislators, we thought it would be a good idea if your display name includes your name and then the town where you live, so that when we're meeting with Senator O'Mara, he knows that he's speaking with Erica, who lives in Corning, for example. Turn your webcam on if possible. It's always helpful to see the people we're talking to. Obviously, if you've been to in-person advocacy day, you know the importance of making that personal connection in a small office with the legislators. So if you can use your webcam, we appreciate that. So maintain the illusion of eye contact. So right now I'm looking right into my webcam, but then I'm going to move and now I'm going to look over into Erica's eyes, which are in the box on my screen. So if you're looking at me, you would notice that I'm not really looking at you. So sorry, that's confusing, but try to look right into your webcam when you speak. And that's the best we can do for making eye contact in a virtual environment. Prepare for good audio. So please use a microphone or headset if possible. I know that some of you might not have one. If you do, try to use it. It just really helps to muffle the sounds from wherever you are, the group noise or the traffic noise, and just makes it very easy for the people listening to hear you. If you're speaking, know how much time you have and plan accordingly. So as Erica mentioned, we will probably have some time constraints on these virtual meetings, but we will sort of let people know how much time they will be given to speak, and would just ask you to stick to that plan. As for the camera, make sure your face is visible and the camera is not cutting off your head or too low or too far, too close. Try to be in a light, well-lit space for good lighting, and try to have a neutral background if possible. So if you've got distractions in the background, it can take away from your message. For instance, I normally have a mirror that hangs on my wall. It's great, it has flamingos on it, but when I turned on my webcam, I saw that that created quite a bad glare. So I took that down for this meeting. I'll put it back up later, but it was just a way to kind of neutralize the background in my dining room. And that brings us to the breakout groups. Wow. Erica, do you want to talk about that?
Thanks, Katura. So we've arrived at the breakout group portion of the workshop. So in just a few moments, Katura is going to divide all of us into smaller groups, and Brian, Katura, Lori, and I will each be leading one of those groups. You'll see a small notification window pop up on your screen inviting you to join your assigned breakout group. So we ask that you do please accept that so that you move into that new space. When you do, you'll be moved into a new Zoom room with just your group members, and we'll spend about 20 minutes in those small groups together. In your groups, we ask that you start by taking about 90 seconds, each of you, to think about your library story and how, maybe write it down and think about the guidelines that Katura used, and then try to answer the questions that are on the screen. So who was the person? What was the challenge? How did the library help? What was the end result? And what is the phrase that pays? Remember, each group will need to pick a person to share their story when we come back together with a larger group after our 20 minutes in small groups. And that person will have about 2 minutes to share their story with the larger group. So group leaders, please be mindful that our goal is to be back in the larger session by 11:05. So you have 20 minutes, and do remember to pick someone to share their story, make sure they're comfortable with that, and remind them to share within a 2-minute time span. Katura, whenever you're ready, you can send us off. I hope that all of you who were able to make it into your breakout groups had a fun and productive time with your small groups. I'm going to call on each of the group leaders. And when I do, group leaders, if you could just let us know who's going to share their story from your group, we'll give that person a chance to share. And then we'll talk about how their story is very effective and what the phrase that pays is, and we can give them some positive feedback. So Brian, could you start us off, please?
Yep. So Kate Thomas from Wayland Free Library is going to represent us and share her story.
Shauna was one of our adult patrons that is an avid reader, and she called the library one day because she was getting ready to go into the hospital for surgery, sheepishly admitting that she didn't know how to go through StarCat to get an ebook, and she desperately needed them on her Kindle and didn't know what to do. Our staff member on the desk walked her through it, talked her exactly how to do it. And Shauna called me later that night and said, I'm now getting books from StarCat, and when I go to the hospital, I'm going to have tons and tons of books, and it's easy. And I think her phrase, "it's easy now," just kind of excited me, because I know she's such an avid reader, would probably be in the library doing the getting hardcover books, but I have a feeling she's going to be going both ways now. And she's a happy camper at the Wayland Library.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kay. I think that's a really great story. And the idea that libraries make you reading easy, that libraries give you access. I think those are great phrases that pay for that particular story. And it's so exciting that you were all able to provide books for Shauna when she was going in for surgery. I'm sure that brought her comfort as well. Lori, could I ask you to introduce the person that will be sharing from your group, please?
Indeed. We were a small group, and Will from Prattsburgh was in our group, and as a very new person, she's having some trouble connecting and coming up with stories, but she's going to be working on that. But what we have as a presenter is we have Heidi Robinson from the Canasteo Library, the Wimedosian Library. Let me introduce. Is she on the screen? Heidi, there you are.
I am. I just did here. I'll put up my picture too. Okay. Okay. I know it's supposed to be 90 seconds, so I'm kind of going right for what we talked about, Lori. We had a patron named Frank. He'd lost his job and was on the computer applying, but he wasn't getting any results. And he asked us to look at his applications. And we found that there was one response that he could change that we thought would help him. And when he came back the next week, he told us he had several interviews after making that one change. Ultimately, he got a job. And so we transformed his life by helping him do this. And it was actually not that hard because he asked us for help. So that made us feel really good. And we felt we transformed his life.
Thank you, Heidi. That's a great story. And I love that phrase that pays, libraries transform lives. That's very powerful. It's succinct. It's great. And that's a great story. I hope you'll share that with legislators. I think it's very impactful.
But Lori liked my one about the summer reading program. That's
Of course she did. Of course she liked the one about.
I'm going to work on that one too. So
Great. Two is better than.
Yeah. I'll have two in the bag.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Heidi.
You're welcome.
Keturah, could I ask you to introduce who will share from your group, please?
Yes, from my group, we have Hannah Kroll, who is a veteran of Library Advocacy Day, even at a very young age, and she's going to share. Hannah, please.
Hi, so yeah, my name's Hannah, and I want to tell the story of Sue, who she, during the COVID-19 pandemic, she experienced partially detached retina, and she actually was going to be in recovery for several weeks at home. And obviously during the pandemic, there weren't many options for entertainment outside of our homes. So she was looking for content that she could watch to provide entertainment while she was in this recovery, because she wasn't able to spend time with her family or do things outside of her home. So the library was not only able to provide the content and the entertainment for while she was recovering, but also was able to kind of be a stand-in for that kind of connection and the to kind of assist in the isolation that I think all of us have been experiencing lately. So the library was able to comfort in a way that we all need right now.
Thanks, Hannah. That's such a great story. And I think libraries provide comfort or able to comfort their patrons. That's such a nice, like a cozy, different take on what libraries can do for their communities. It's not just like internet or book, like we can provide a service and something more heartfelt too. So thank you so much for sharing. And from my group, I have Tina Dalton and Sherilyn Wise from the Cuba Library. They wrote a story together and I suspect Tina will share it. Tina, can I ask you to turn on your mic?
Yes, hello. I apologize, I'm at a desktop that doesn't have a webcam today. So our story is about the Smith family. This family has 3 teenage girls, and before COVID, they came to the library every afternoon and evening to access the internet, because where they live, the infrastructure does not exist for them to have internet in their home. Once the library had to close for COVID. You could often find them sitting in their car out front in front of the library at all times of the morning, evenings, almost any time you came by the library. Their family was sitting in the car out front. So when we opened back up again, they started coming back into the library. And one of their daughters, Sophie, she's in chorus, and she's been using our community room to join into her Zoom chorus classes and sing along so that she doesn't have to sit in her car and sing in front of the rest of her family. So libraries fill the gap in the community. Let me try that again. Libraries fill the gap in communities that lack infrastructure for internet access. And I left out the part where they did try a library hotspot at their house, but they didn't get a signal. So even though that is an option for some people, there's still many places in our community where even a hotspot isn't going to help them.
Thank you so much, Tina. I think it's great that your story highlights multiple solutions that the library had offered, where they tried hotspots and that didn't work. Then they had access to Wi-Fi from the parking lot. And then even further, she got to do chorus practice from the community room. And a nice thing about that story is it has a little bit of humor. It makes you laugh to think about her practicing chorus in the car with her family. And that phrase that pays is also very impactful. Libraries provide access, and even further, libraries provide access to broadband internet connection, or to at least to Wi-Fi from the library parking lot, which is great. Thank you so much for sharing. And thanks to everybody who shared their stories today. I appreciate that. So we're going to turn it over to Brian to wrap things up now.
Yes, I echo Erica's sentiment. The stories are fantastic. I love being in our group. They even allowed me the opportunity to share my story, which was kind of an opportunity for me to reflect on why I got into public librarianship to begin with. But I guess the biggest thing is we wanted to give you all an opportunity to self-educate. We always think that's one of the greatest things coming out of any STLS offered workshop is that member librarians can use this as an opportunity to learn and develop their practices and get better and strengthen their libraries. But also we learn through this process as well. We're continually evolving as STLS staff and trying to help all of you. And so it's just a great all-around learning experience. So, but really we wanted self-education to take place, but we also wanted to put it into practice. So that's why we kind of always try to focus on some type of experiential learning through our workshops. And hopefully this prepared you. I know most of the folks that are on today's call are veterans, and so you've gone through this advocacy experience before, but you always have to sharpen your tools. And so I think this was a really good opportunity for us to come together and sharpen those tools and kind of just go through it, because the environment's different this year, and we'll kind of see, how that plays out over the next few months. So hopefully next year we can all, march into Albany and walk into the well and meet with our elected officials in Albany, as opposed to having to do it online. The big thing I do want to kind of leave with is this idea of 2 + 2 is for advocacy success. This is Brian coming up with a silly slogan at his dining room table at 9 o'clock at night, but for me it works, and so I'm going to try to sell it to all of you. Our hope is this year, you've already kind of done one of the two things that we're asking you to do, but we kind of hope that this is a mulligan, and even coming out of this meeting, you'll still do the two things. But just take a pledge to do two things this year when it comes to advocating to elected officials about funding priorities. We talked about the deficiency in state aid or aid to libraries. We talked about the challenges that it imposes upon us to provide good community impact services. And so just take two forms of action this year, whether it's sending an email, making a phone call to elected officials, which is really a lot less intimidating than you might think it is, because you don't actually talk to those elected officials, you talk to their aide and just leave them a voicemail. Sending a letter or participating in an advocacy day. So just trying to do two of those things between now and March 31st. It'll have such a huge impact. And also trying to do some of the things in terms of sharing out STLS social media posts, and you'll start receiving a lot of email in your inboxes telling you how you can take action. So if you can take that type of action at least twice, that would be fantastic. But then the second part of the component is asking two people to do the same type of thing. So really you're taking 3 actions. So you're taking your 2 actions plus you're asking somebody else to do those 2 things as well, or similar 2 things. And when you compound that or multiply it out, we really have a strong advocacy effort and stronghold across the system, as long as all of us that are on this call and other member librarians and trustees and friends groups are doing the same exact thing. And the thing I will say is we do have a strong advocacy effort. New York Library Association, they actually keep track of the number of times elected officials are contacted throughout the advocacy season. And our elected officials, so that whether it's Assemblywoman Burns, Assemblyman Giglio, Assemblyman Friend, Assemblyman Palmisano, Senator O'Mara, formerly Senator Young, but now Senator Borrello, they keep track of the number of times that we contact those elected officials, because those are our representatives for this region. And we're always with those officials, like we rank in like the top 20. And given the number of elected officials that there are in the rural region that we have, having a lot less population than other parts of the region, shows that we're doing our work. And it shows that STLS is engaging with you and you're engaging with us, but you're more importantly engaging with your community members. So that's what we're asking you to do today, is take the tools that we've sharpened, take the knowledge that we've harnessed, and just go out there and do the work that we need to do, because it's important. And what we do today certainly will impact what future advocates are going to be doing far down the road. So thank you very much, everyone. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate you being here. Before we end this meeting, I want to thank Keturah and Erica. They joined STLS within like the last 3 to 4 years. And when I came here to STLS, it was kind of myself and one other staff member that facilitated advocacy efforts. And they've really upped our game, everything from social media presence to how we engage with you and get you ready for Advocacy Day. So, and I know that there's other professional staff that help us out doing that. So I want to thank Lindsay Guy and Lori Brown that are also on this call. You really make the difference in making this happen. So thanks for all your efforts. And I know we'll have a great advocacy season because of all of you. Thanks, everyone.